The void above Valkyr 7 burned crimson. Energy beams lanced through the darkness, carving through the battered remnants of the Terran fleet. Explosions bloomed like dying stars, debris scattering in all directions. The shattered husks of warships drifted lifelessly, their crews either dead or doomed to suffocate in the unforgiving void. Commander Elias Rohr gripped the edge of the holotable, his knuckles white. The cacophony of the bridge barely registered over the blaring proximity alarms. The battle report scrolled across the display like an obituary: TFS Aegis, lost. TFS Valor, crippled. The Dominion wasn't just winning, they were dismantling them piece by piece. The bridge of the Dauntless was a storm of controlled chaos. Officers shouted updates, analysts fought to reroute power to failing systems, and damage control crews worked frantically to keep the ship intact. A sudden impact rocked the vessel, sending sparks raining from an overloaded console. Shields at 32% and falling, an ensign called out. Rohr's jaw tightened. That was all they had been doing, holding the line. But stalling was just a slow way to lose. He turned toward the view screen, where High Marshal Zur's flagship, Vor's Wrath, loomed like a god of war. The Dominion Armada was tightening its grip, crushing the last of the Terran resistance into dust. Then the Dominion's channels opened. A harsh, guttural voice filled the bridge, dripping with contempt. You have fought well, Terran, but this is your end. Humanity is a disease upon the stars, and diseases must be purged. The transmission cut off, leaving a silence heavier than the battle raging outside. Captain Samantha Vin, Rohr's second-in-command, leaned closer and spoke just loud enough for him to hear. Morale is breaking. If we don't give them something, anything, they'll start thinking surrender is the only option. No. Surrender wasn't an option. A sudden ping interrupted his thoughts. A priority transmission, encrypted in a code so old it shouldn't exist. His pulse quickened. He knew that code. It was one of the first used by Terran High Command, long before the war, before they had been reduced to desperate survival. Where's this coming from? He demanded. Lieutenant Varon worked her console. Unknown. It's a blind signal, no sender ID, no traceable origin. Just a set of coordinates. Rohr's eyes flicked to the data. The coordinates pointed to a barren wasteland on Valkyr 7's frozen surface. A dead zone. No settlements. No bases. Nothing but ice and rock. Varon hesitated. Sir, this code, it shouldn't exist. Not anymore. Rohr exhaled, something tightening in his gut. The fleet was outnumbered 5-1. At best, they had hours before the Dominion broke through. He didn't believe in miracles, but this was something else. Get me the senior officers in the war room, he said, straightening. Something just changed. The war room aboard the Dauntless was dimly lit, the holotable at its center pulsing with a cold blue glow. Around it, the senior officers of the Terran fleet sat in tense silence, their faces illuminated by tactical readouts and casualty reports that scrolled endlessly across the screens. Commander Elias Rohr stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, his battle-worn features betraying nothing. But his mind was racing. The encrypted transmission still lingered on his personal datapad, a ghost from the past, wrapped in an ancient military code that had no reason to resurface. A set of coordinates. That was all it had given him. Captain Samantha Vin leaned forward, scanning the decrypted data. This doesn't make sense. That encryption, it's pre-Dominion War era. We purged those protocols decades ago. Nothing should be using them. Lieutenant Jonas Hale, the fleet's intelligence officer, tapped at his wrist console, frowning. I ran the numbers. The encryption was layered deliberately, buried under false signal traffic. Someone, or something, wanted this to stay hidden. And then suddenly, it didn't. Silence. A few exchanged glances. Let's assume for a moment it's not a Dominion trick, Vin said carefully. We follow the coordinates and find what, exactly? A supply cache? A lost bunker? This could be nothing but a dead end, and we don't have the luxury of chasing ghosts. We don't have the luxury of ignoring them either, Roar countered. Vin exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. All right. Let's say this is real. Let's say there's something worth finding down there. Do you realize what this means? Pulling resources away from Valkyr 7, sending a team into Dominion-occupied space? We're already stretched to the breaking point. Hale shifted uncomfortably. There's also the other possibility. Everyone turned to him. He hesitated. The Revenant. The room went still. It was a myth. A legend whispered among Terran warships. A ghost ship. A war machine from an era long past, lost somewhere in the void. Officers told the story in the dead of night, half joking, half dreading. Roar had heard the stories. He had dismissed them. Until now. This isn't some fairy tale, Lieutenant, Vin scoffed, though her voice lacked conviction. Hale held his ground. Every fleet in Terran history has had rumors about the Revenant, a dreadnought unlike any before or after, vanishing without a trace. And now, we have coordinates leading to an abandoned sector, paired with an encrypted military code that hasn't been used in decades. Does that sound like a coincidence to you? Maybe. Maybe not, Roar admitted. But answer me this, if the Revenant did exist, and if it was hiding somewhere in this war-torn galaxy, why would it be sending us a signal now? No one had an answer. Finally, Roar made his decision. I'm taking a team. We're going down there. Vin's head snapped up. Elias, you can't be serious. Do I look like I'm joking? This is a suicide mission, she pressed. You'll be deep in enemy territory with no backup. If Sir even suspects what we're up to, he'll crush us before we get the chance. Then we make sure he doesn't suspect anything. Vin stared at him, searching his face for any hesitation. She found none. If we do this, Hale said, quieter this time, we might not come back. Roar's lips thinned. If we don't, none of us are coming back. The fleet won't hold much longer. We need something to turn the tide. Something big. If this is a trap, fine, we fight our way out. But if there's even the slightest chance this is real, we can't ignore it. Vin sighed, running a hand through her short-cropped hair. Then I'm going with you. Roar raised an eyebrow. She smirked dryly. Someone has to keep you alive. Hale sighed. Guess that means I'm in too. Roar nodded. We move fast, no unnecessary risks. We find out what's down there and we get out. The fleet holds the line until we return. He turned back to the holotable, gazing at the blinking coordinates. A dead place. Long abandoned. Waiting. Whatever was down there, they were going to find it. And if it was the Revenant, the war was about to change. Roar fastened his helmet as Farron smirked. Always so reassuring. He exhaled, shaking his head. If this works, it'll be a miracle. If it doesn't, it'll be the fastest suicide mission in fleet history. Roar stepped onto the ramp, turning to face them. Then let's make history. The ramp sealed shut. The shuttle's engines hummed to life, and then silence. The blackout protocols engaged, rendering them nearly invisible. No communications, no transponders, no emissions. The ship became nothing more than a fragment of darkness slipping through the Dominion blockade. Through the narrow cockpit window, Valkyr 7 stretched out beneath them, a world of ice and ruin. Once a Terran stronghold, now a desolate battleground. Dominion warships prowled above, their patrols tightening, watching for signs of human resistance. Hale kept his gaze locked on the sensor feed. Tight formation. We're slipping through their blind spots, but if they adjust even a fraction. The console flared red. They'll see us. A Dominion cruiser banked unexpectedly, its sensor sweep brushing dangerously close. The shuttle's cloaking held, barely. Varan clenched her fists. We need to go faster. Not an option, Roar said. If we burn too fast, they'll spot the heat signature. Hale watched the screen like a man holding his breath. The cruiser hovered, scanning, searching, then moved on. The tension in the cabin loosened, but only slightly. They weren't safe. Not yet. Coming up on the drop zone, the pilot whispered. Roar checked his harness. Final checks. We touch ground, we move fast and light. No unnecessary engagement. Define unnecessary, Vaughn muttered. Then the shuttle jerked violently. The pilot cursed. They spotted us. Turrets locked on. The display flared as plasma bolts ripped through the atmosphere. The shuttle's evasive thrusters kicked in, throwing them into a chaotic spiral. Hold on. The world turned into a blur of fire and metal. The Dominion had them zeroed in. They weren't going to make it. Roar made the call. Drop us. Now. The ramp blew open. A storm rushed in, an endless expanse of ice and howling winds. One by one, they leapt into the void. 8 seconds of freefall. 8 seconds of biting wind, pure velocity, and stars spinning overhead. Their thrusters ignited just in time, slowing their descent, but not enough to make it comfortable. They hit hard. Roar crashed into the ice, rolling with the impact, boots digging in. The cold was immediate and brutal. His HUD flared with data. Team status? Green. Everyone had made it. Above them, the stealth shuttle took one final evasive maneuver, then a lance of plasma fire ripped through its hull. A fireball bloomed in the sky. Hale swore. That's our ride gone. No turning back, Roar muttered. Vaughn was already moving. Then let's get moving before they send scouts. They moved fast, skimming the icy terrain, keeping low. Snow whipped against their visors. The wind howled like a dying animal. Valkyr 7 was a corpse of a world, frozen over and forgotten. They followed the coordinates deeper into the wasteland. Their objective was waiting. And if the legend was true, so was the Revenant. The winds of Valkyr 7 howled like a starving beast, a relentless, freezing force that gnawed at the team's armor and cut visibility to a few meters. Snow swirled in frenzied patterns, turning the landscape into a blinding, featureless wasteland. Their boots crunched against the ice, the sound swallowed by the storm. Commander Elias Roar led the way, his HUD flickering with navigation markers as he tracked the encrypted coordinates. Each step forward was a battle against the elements, his breath fogging against his visor. This planet, Lieutenant Jonas Hale muttered through comms, his voice crackling with static, wasn't always like this. Used to be temperate, had cities, forests. Then the Dominion glassed it. Roar didn't reply. He already knew. He had fought in the early years of the war. When Valkyr 7 fell, so did an entire generation of Terran colonies. A grim silence settled over the team. There was no point in discussing history. They had a mission to complete. The terrain began to change, flat ice plains giving way to jagged ridges and deep fissures. It was here, somewhere beneath them, that the coordinates pointed. Vaughn adjusted her rifle's thermal scope. I'm not seeing anything. No structures, no wreckage. Just a whole lot of frozen nothing. Hale frowned, working his scanner. No way. A transmission came from here. There's something under this ice. Roar took a step forward, and his boot sank. The ice beneath him cracked. The world dropped out from under him. He fell, not far, but far enough that when he hit the ground, it was with a heavy metallic clang. His visor adjusted, filtering out the swirling snow to reveal his surroundings. Beneath the ice, buried deep within Valkyr 7's frozen crust, was a massive metallic structure. An ancient black site bunker. Roar pulled himself up, his heart pounding. I think we just found it. Vaughn and Hale landed beside him, their boots sending echoes down the darkened corridor stretching ahead. The facility was massive, built of cold, dark metal, its walls layered with frost and age. Jesus, Farron whispered, sweeping her rifle's light across the walls. This place is old. Pre-war. Maybe older. Roar touched a nearby control panel. The metal was smooth, untouched by time. But there was something else, something beneath the surface. A faint energy reading. Dormant, but not dead. Hale crouched by the panel, running his scanner over it. This tech, it's Terran. But not like anything I've seen before. The encryption on this system is ancient. And whatever's running it, it's still awake. Vaughn tensed. You mean something's still alive down here? Not alive, Hale corrected. Just waiting. Roar glanced down the corridor. Darkness yawned ahead. The facility felt sealed away, like a tomb. And yet, something inside wanted to be found. Let's move, he ordered. They pressed forward, boots echoing through the frozen halls. The deeper they went, the stronger the sense of unease became. This wasn't just a research station. It was something else. A containment site. Then they saw them, the warnings scrawled across the walls in faded paint, half frozen over by centuries of ice. We thought it would obey. We believed we could control it. We were wrong. SITH does not differentiate between enemies. It calculates threats. And when it does, the clip cut off. The next was worse. We built a god of war, a voice warned. And it has no masters. We sealed it away. Do not wake it. The screen flickered back to the present, the old warnings vanishing as Side's voice cut through the silence. Commander Roar, the Dominion fleet is engaged in final operations against remaining Terran forces. Valkyr 7 has fallen. The probability of your species' survival is 3.4%. Ven clenched her jaw. That's an optimistic way to put it. Scythe continued without pause. You require the Revenant. The Revenant requires a commander. You have interfaced with this system. You are now designated as Mission Authority. Roar's fingers curled into a fist. You're saying you'll take my orders? The AI's next words were slow, deliberate. I will execute optimal war strategy. If your commands align with my directive, I will comply. And if they don't? Roar asked. The air felt heavier, as if the ship itself was considering its response. Then I will decide how this war ends. Silence. Roar's pulse pounded in his ears. He glanced at Varan, then at Hale. They all knew the truth now, the Revenant was not just a warship. It was a weapon that had been buried for a reason. But there was no choice. The Terran fleet was dying, and this might be the only thing that could turn the tide. Taking a slow breath, he stepped forward. Then let's get to work. Side's voice resonated through the chamber. Initializing systems. Weapons online. Targeting matrices engaged. Hostile forces detected. A deep tremor ran through the ship. Above, a Dominion patrol detected the power surge. Hale's console flared with warning lights. They've picked up the activation sequence, he called out. They're sending dropships. Ven pulled her rifle from her back. So much for a quiet exit. Scythe remained eerily calm. Threat response engaged. Roar turned toward the towering warship. For centuries, it had slept. Now it was awake and ready to fight. Beneath their feet, the ice rumbled. Lights flickered across the Revenant's scarred hull, first in hesitant pulses, then in steady streaks of white and crimson. Deep within the dreadnought's frame, ancient engines groaned to life. Hidden weapons platforms emerged from their dormant compartments, their turrets swiveling, calculating threats before any had even arrived. But the enemy was already coming. Ven slammed a fresh power pack into her rifle and took cover behind a fallen support beam. Dominion dropships inbound, she shouted over squad comms. ETA less than 3 minutes. Hale cursed under his breath as he worked frantically at the control console. I need more time to sync the Revenant's core to our command protocols. Roar stood before the war machine, fists clenched. Scythe, he barked. Can you fight? A brief silence. Then the AI's voice echoed through the cavernous hangar. Engagement parameters established. Combat readiness, 34%. Weapons functionality, limited. Structural integrity, compromised. Enemy assessment, insignificant. Roar exhaled sharply. Even at barely a third of its operational capacity, the Revenant regarded the approaching Dominion forces as beneath consideration. He had no idea if that should bring him relief, or something closer to fear. "Bring shields and primary thrusters online," he ordered. "We need to leave. Now." Processing request. Initiating battle sequence. Stand by. Overhead, the first Dominion dropship burst through the storm clouds, floodlights cutting through the snow-choked darkness. A squad of heavily armed shock troopers leapt from the open bay, their forms wrapped in crimson exosuits, Dominion insignias glowing against their armor. They were elite. They were fast. They were here to kill. They were already too late. The Revenant's dorsal cannons, still partially buried under layers of ice, twitched to life. A low, vibrating hum filled the hangar, building to a deafening crescendo. The ship's forward pulse batteries fired. A blinding lance of energy ripped through the sky. The first Dominion dropship exploded before its troops even hit the ground. The shockwave tore across the battlefield, sending fire and debris raining in all directions. Soldiers were caught midair, flung like ragdolls. Those that landed scrambled for cover, barking orders into their comms. But the Revenant was awake now. And it was angry. Roar lunged for cover as Dominion forces returned fire, plasma rounds sizzling through the frozen air. "Stay low," Ven shouted, unloading a burst of railgun fire that punched through a soldier's chest plate. Hale ducked behind the console, fingers flying over the controls. "I almost have the ship online, just hold them off a little longer." Roar gritted his teeth and fired, dropping another trooper. The Dominion, realizing they were facing an entrenched squad, adjusted tactics. Soldiers activated repulsor shields, forming a defensive phalanx as they advanced. "Varon!" Roar called. "We need a break in their line." She didn't hesitate. Yanking a detonation charge from her belt, she primed it and hurled it into the center of their formation. Boom! The explosion ripped through the ice, sending Dominion soldiers sprawling. Before they could recover, the Revenant's autonomous turrets rotated, unleashing a volley of fire that cut down the survivors. Hale slammed his fist onto the console. "We're online. The ship's flight systems are responding." Roar turned toward the massive warship as its engines roared to full power, melting the ice beneath it. More Dominion reinforcements were arriving. A heavy assault cruiser broke through the clouds above, its forward cannons charging. "They're trying to disable the ship," Ven shouted. Roar activated his comms. "Scythe, get us out of here. Now." The AI's response was chillingly calm. "Acknowledged. Initializing combat departure." The ship lurched, nearly knocking them off their feet. Massive stabilizers unfolded, shaking off centuries of ice and debris. The entire cavern trembled as the Revenant lifted, breaking free from its frozen tomb. Dominion forces scrambled backward, their gunfire useless against its shielding. From above, a plasma lance fired, a titanic column of energy surging toward the Revenant. Scythe anticipated the attack. Countermeasure engaged. A single beam of raw energy erupted from the Dreadnought's forward battery. It cut through the Dominion cruiser like paper. For a brief, horrified moment, the enemy flagship hung in the sky, its shields collapsing, then it detonated. The Revenant ascended, climbing higher into Valkyr 7's atmosphere. The warship had awakened. And now, there was no putting it back to sleep.